March 30th. Welcome to Let's Talk Native on the LTN Radio Network. This program breaks all the rules for Native radio. No buffalo speeches, no mystic healing, no special Indian prayers. We tackle the real issues facing Native people with a look back at our glorious and our grave history, a tough look at where we're at now, and a look forward to our ongoing battles for sovereignty and autonomy. Let's Talk Native is produced in association with Iroquois Promotions on the LTN Radio Network, streaming live from the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation and simulcast and rebroadcast on the Gwe, that's CKWE in Tindanega. You can find us, our audio streaming at www.ltnradionet.com. And, of course, we are streaming live with our audio and video on Facebook. So you can check us out there. I am John Kane, the show's host and producer. I've got some friends in studio. I've got my friend Paul Delaron, Dagorundige. I've got James Grace, Ogoyeta. And, of course, you guys might recognize the other guy. It's been a while, but we
it has been a while.
Picked him up alongside of the road, and we said, hey, come in. We got Matt Hill joining us. So Matt Hill in studio with us again. We've missed you, and it's good to have you back.
It's good to be back.
Missed you guys too. You guys haven't been down this neck of the woods in a while, so you got to pull the microphone closer. You can pull it.
He's moving. Oh,
you don't have to move forward.
Yeah, but I would have liked to have moved forward.
Yeah, I know. All right. Look, we didn't plan exactly what we're going to talk about. When I have these guys in studio, anything goes. We do know that there's a lot of stuff happening, and over the last few weeks, I've been talking a lot about what New York State has been doing to, for a long time, but things that are playing out in some of the courts, their interference with native-to-native trade. Recently, one of my sponsors and one of the guys in the middle of that conflict, Eric White, has been on the news, and they've been reporting that he's building an off-ramp off the thruway through one of his business properties. Yeah, he's not building an off-ramp. Although there might be a place to step off the thruway for a little bit, but it's not an off-ramp. We'll see what he's really got going there. But he certainly grabbed the attention of state officials, of the media, as he should. What's happening right now with this governor in particular, following in his dad's footsteps, is really just an affront to our sovereignty. It is almost by definition forced assimilation. The whole idea of trying to impose state law on native businesses, on native products, on native-to-native trade it's a stark violation of international law, the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. It's a stark violation of our sovereignty, and it's something we've never given the state the right to do. Now, but with Paul and James in studio in particular, it's probably important to talk about what's happening in other communities as well, because the impositions that are being brought against our people on either side of the imaginary line, the Canadian border, is now gaining some complicity with so-called recognized leadership, where the municipality, trying to turn our territories into municipalities of Canada or New York State, for that matter, is one of the things that's been underway for a while. It's something we've talked about before, but now it's becoming more clear with people who Canada or the United States recognize as leaders. There are deals to be made, and as the people become more and more aware of some of these things, it's starting to cause a lot of tension within some of these communities. And I think this whole municipalization of native territories is something that obviously it's been raised in a lot of the conversations about the effectiveness or the violations that the Indian Act have always been. But the thing is, everybody figured once Harper was gone and all these, so many people thought that Justin Trudeau was going to be such a better solution, and so the pretty boy gets in there as the Prime Minister of Canada, and frankly, there's a lot of things that are happening that in many ways are worse. It's the same kind of situation that we had when Barack Obama became the president of the United States. Everybody thought, oh yeah, a person of color is going to be in there, a young dynamic leader, and it's going to have a positive impact. He's the guy who was pushing the Dakota Access Pipeline through. So we find out that there's a lot of wolves in sheep's clothing when it comes to their leadership. But one of the things that is clear is that we've got some wolves in sheep's clothing in our own territories, and I think that's part of the problem. So I'll let you run with this for a while, Paul.
Yes. Before I begin, wagre to kwan horado na gwego de watong sa daje. Yo wesa ji arisa iguata sonayo da neso da iti da kwani goradogo te tinio haji nu ya kwana gerenyo. Negatiwai as watong sios te kwate gata. Sinaho to nuwa kariwai daje. Ya uju hak te. Ise ni oni neko na kwati sa wanagere. Wachine to nu yo wawe nene. I first would like to give a greeting to everybody. That I'm glad to have the opportunity to be able to speak to you on what's happening on the north side of the imaginary line. But I ask you to listen well, because what's happening to us is going to happen to you. Is that we're very close to facing some very serious times. Not that these times aren't serious, but it's coming to basically the 11th hour. Is that the so-called leaders, so-called representatives in our communities, every band council across Canada has signed agreements that the people are not party to. And it is only now that people are finding out that the agreements that were made has given the federal government of Canada and the provinces total jurisdiction according to these agreements that were signed by the band councils. And the only part left for them to complete is what they call membership, is to define who are the members. But they're not explaining to the people is what is membership, and basically they positioned themselves as corporations, and they're looking as corporations how they're going to capitalize, but not for the benefit of our people, but for their themselves individually. And some of the things they've already brought into our territories. They've misled the people into believing that these enterprises that they brought in were on behalf of the people. But they've never shown any of the contracts or documentation to the people. And now that we're starting to get access to these, we find that nowhere in these contracts is there anything to do with the people. But it's individuals, the corporations, and that agreements they've made with individuals on the outside, as well as with Canada and with the provinces. And many millions and millions, about billions of dollars are being raised through some of the enterprises, and all of the monies are being sent to offshore accounts of the Isle of Man. And our people don't even know how much money. There's been no accounting, and they led our people to believe that our communities were the majority shareholders, and our people don't even have a single share in there. So it's a lot of these kind of things. And now they want to bring casinos in. They want to bring a whole lot of other things in. And they're beefing up their police forces because they know that once the people truly become aware of everything that's going on, that people are going to be angry. And they want to bring the municipalization of our communities. They want to enforce all provincial laws and all federal laws, and many of our people are going to resist. And most likely it's going to become very violent situations. And so they need a paramilitary force that they've established in our communities, and they're continuously trying to recruit more of our people to become part of these paramilitary forces to be the first line of combat against Ngwehunwe. And so this is the kind of things that's going on. And more and more we're having people pass us documentation and so on, exposing exactly what's going on, and that people are finding out that even the homes that we have on according to them, we don't even own. We don't own our land. We don't own our homes, and everything in the so-called reservation is owned by individuals. And and our people are getting very angry. Uh, we the Discarnagete are reorganizing, and we are going to hold a meeting next week, the 7th and 8th of April, and we are going to have representation from across the Confederacy, but not just from within the Confederacy. But the Anishinaabe people are going to send representation, as well as we believe that the Chippewas, the Muncies, the Delawares, and other people are also going to be coming, and even some of the people from the Sarnia area who are also Anishinaabe. And because what's happening to them, they know is the same thing that's happening to our people. We're being attacked from all sides. Our hunting and fishing rights, um, you know, uh, it's just getting worse by the moment. And now, Canada and the band councils are asking the Longhouse representatives to sit at this Iroquois caucus table to be part of the negotiations and that, but they're not even bringing these issues to the people to ask the people, um, about what's their thoughts on all of this. And already band councils are negotiating on the seaway that's passed through our territories because those waterways and everything still uh, belongs to our people. Because the fact of the matter is that we, the Yuguanushuni, we have never relinquished title to our lands. We have never signed away our sovereignty. And the people who claim that they have that authority have already sold their birthright. But the thing people need to understand is these individuals are free to sell their birthright, give their birthright away, or abandon their birthright. But by doing so, they never had the authority to drag all of us down with them. And we're making that very clear. And so the Discargueta are getting together because we need to organize. We need to be prepared to defend the rights of our people. We need to be prepared to preserve the right of our children, our grandchildren, to be able to live as Ungwahungwe and to be the ones to determine what our futures will be. And even our economics is being attacked. In fact, this tomorrow night, CTV TV in Canada has got a special expose where they're going to try to convince Canadians and everyone else that Native people being involved in this cigarette industry, that this is organized crime in the worst form, and really again starting to paint our people with the ugly brush, so to try to justify any invasions in our communities. And so different things are are starting in our communities, and already many of our communities have been raided, um, um, and not only our communities, but the Chippewa Muncies and other people as well. And so we have to do something.
Well,
We
if you don't mind, one of the things that is problematic is, yeah, we are really facing problems with states, with the provinces, with the U.S. Federal government, the Canadian federal government, and as you alluded to earlier, part of the problem is the quote unquote leadership that that people want to claim have the right to sell us out. And it's not just band councils. It is longhouse people or
that's,
people who claim to be.
that's right.
A perfect example is some of what's happening down in Onondaga. I mean, Oren Lyons and company have spent in excess of $20 million to promote themselves in this lacrosse tournament stuff, spending millions on buildings that, I mean, they've got more lacrosse space than they have people there. And then they just held a meeting recently to discuss this decades-old investment that they have been so-called supposedly working on, which is called Plantagon, which is this ridiculous concept for creating urban indoor gardening, where the Onondagas have already spent over $15 million of where these guys have spent $15 million of Onondaga money and have put out collection baskets for all of their cult-like following to throw millions more in. There have literally been tens of millions of dollars, probably in excess of $100 million that has been generated for this Plantagon concept, and there's not a single greenhouse that has been built. Not a single facility has been built. And in the meantime, you've got Oren Lyons and Sid Hill sitting as the senior executive officers of this corporation, lining their pockets. So when we talk about what's wrong in our territories, it isn't just the opposition that we feel from the outside in the prime minister or the president or the governor or the premiers of these provinces. It's the corruption that's within, and this is obviously been a problem that's been plaguing us for quite some time.
Yes, and they're using the titles of our families. We have 50 titles in the Confederacy, Adadaho and 49 other titles. And they're using these titles to legitimize themselves, misleading everybody into believing that they have the authority because they are these title holders. But the fact of the matter is they are not title holders. None of them are. It's always been our women who are the title holders. And it's the women that have invested with that responsibility to take care of those titles on behalf of all of our people, men, women, and children. And that these guys who've been appointed to represent our people, but they don't consult with our people. They don't hear what the people have to say. And the thing is, they're making policy, and they can't make law. They're making policies. And I was just involved in, I've been testifying in different court cases, and I don't go there to test challenging anything. All I do is I go into the courts and I explain exactly what is our culture, what is our ways, and so on. And the courts are listening to this. And one of the cases up in Ganawag, it's where people are being evicted. And so I was asked to go and explain our way. And I made it clear to the court that I knew that these cases didn't belong in the court. I knew that, that my being there is not that I recognize the court, but I was asked by people to explain our ways and only explain our ways. And the judges have really been listening to this. In the courts, it came out very clearly is that the band councils are not government. They have no authority to make any laws, any agreements as governments. And in fact, and the court made it very clear, all they are committees who are there to implement projects and policies of the Department of Indian Affairs. And so they keep saying, well, we have Mohawk law, but the thing is that there's no such thing as Mohawk law. We have Guyana Goa. That is what our law is. And so when they were asked if what their Mohawk law is based on, they says culture and tradition.
Customs and tradition.
Custom and tradition.
I say that, yeah.
And, and they says, so if it's custom and tradition, then it's under Guyana Goa. And, the band chief, he says, absolutely not. And so they said, if it's custom and tradition, why it's not under Guyana Goa?
What's the custom?
Yeah. And then he says, then you must be under the Indian Act. They says, no. Then what is your foundation? And all they say is custom and tradition. They would never answer the question. They would never clarify anything. And then they kept claiming that they're a sovereign nation. And so they says, well, if you're a sovereign nation, like all the other nations of the world, you talk, everybody's following this equality, non-prejudicial, and this and that, then why aren't you complying with this if you say you're this? But now the band council is kind of backtracking, and when they were asked, why really aren't you using sovereignty to defend our people? And again, this band chief, he says, we can't. And they said, why not? He says, because the band council isn't sovereign.
Well, and I guess to back this up a little bit, because part of the reason that these things are in court is because these band councils rely on the authority of the province to back up their authority. And so what the challenge is, do they really have authority? So some of these people who are being evicted are saying, no, they don't. They can't wield. They don't wield the authority over us.
Mhm.
And if the province is claiming that they somehow have been empowered, then let's flush this thing out in court. And so your testimony in there is to clear up that these guys don't have any legitimate authority to do the things that they're claiming that they're trying
They
to
have
do.
no legitimate authority under our way, and they have no legitimate authority under Canada's law.
And that's why the courts are so willing to hear this thing, because
Yeah.
they're being they're actually kind of caught in this thing. And I'm not defending those
Yeah.
courts, because they haven't exactly been fair with us either. But the reality is they're being presented with this thing to try to make a determination that for how is it possible that these band councils could have any authority from any place, and they don't.
And the thing is that it's coming out, and that is that all these agreements, like this judge gave himself 6 months to render his decision, and this judge is saying, I'm going to be careful on how I make this decision because I don't want anybody appealing this case, and that because no judge likes his decision appealed.
Yes,
And he wants to make sure of this, especially after what he heard when I testified. And the band council lawyers didn't even cross-examine me, not one question. It's almost like they didn't want to hear me explain more things to the people. And so what they're becoming afraid of is that if this judge makes this decision that the band council has absolutely no authority and all this kind of stuff, the thing is that it's going to expose the fact that the band councils, the provinces, and the federal government were all in cahoots together, committing an illegal act against Ungwahumwe people.
Yeah, because bottom line is you've got the country, you got Canada and the provinces propping up a false government.
That's
and
right.
That's really
That's
what it comes
right,
down to.
and that's what it's coming to. And now the people like in Ganawage, people in Nakujastin, Tandanego, Ganasadage, and Wakta, and Oswego, everybody's becoming aware of this. But not only us. The Mi'kmaq, the Maliseets, the Wabanakis, the Anishinaabes, and all the others, they're starting to, really understand this. And so people are getting angry.
Well, and then there was a court case out west in Western Canada that upheld the rights of the people there to their land, and it had to do with mining and a few things like that. So a few of these courts, when faced with the reality of the laws that are before them, are finding out that some of Canada's claims have been fully illegitimized.
And the other thing is that there were people who are supposed longhouse people, knowledgeable people, were ready to go and testify on behalf of the band council to say that the band council had the authority to make these laws. And when they found out I was coming to testify, they all backed out. They all refused to go and testify. In fact, one of them who helped the band council design this whole thing, he was supposed to be one of their experts, and he decided he's not coming to court, and so he texts one of the women and he says, I just want to inform you that I'm not coming to court and I've changed my opinion. and he says, I don't support the band council's right to make laws and so on and so forth. Yeah, he was one of the authors of this policy. And so she presented that to the court, and the court accepted that. His text was accepted.
It admitted as evidence.
Yes, yeah. And it's getting crazier and crazier.
Well, this past Wednesday in New York, I screened the film The Doctrine of Discovery, and I haven't actually screened that film in quite some time. But as I'm going through and talking about the film afterwards, because it's a short film, it's only about an hour long. So it gives plenty of time to discuss what the film doesn't cover, especially including the contradictions. And some of the folks who were asking questions, what they asked was, well, how does this thing become significant in U.S. law? And so I explained how it got codified into federal law through a ruling back in 1823 that totally contradicted even language in Canandaigua Treaty from 29 years earlier, where they suggest that Native people can't own title to land. And once they put that stuff into a court case, what it does is it not only establishes a precedent that they build more court cases, and frankly, every jurisdictional case, almost every land use and land rights, land claims case goes back to this one bad decision based on church dogma. And then the other thing that happens is that legislators, and this is true on both sides because Canada used even U.S. law to justify their so-called discovery doctrines there. And what it does is it emboldens politicians to pass laws based on authority that the courts are claiming they have when they don't have it either. So that's what we have on the other side of the ledger. And then on our side, we have people who are, almost, I mean, on a regular basis, selling us out. And I will back off of one thing. I think there are very, very corrupt people, Native people, who are claiming these leadership roles. But I also think that there are people who are in leadership who just feel so unempowered and so weak that they take the position that if they go along with the state, the United States or the Canadian federal government, the provinces or state, that somehow they can hang on to something. And I think when I look back over in past generations, and we talked about things like the book that I'm working on, Lies My Elders Told Me. I think this is part of that scenario where there are people amongst us who don't really believe in their sovereignty. They don't really believe in their identity or the rights that we have to exist as people. And I think that lends itself to this constant battle that we have with the outside.
Yeah. There's there's these things that are really being looked at carefully right now. It's like up in Canada, the Native people are really looking at this. And the thing is that, Canada is saying, well, we don't recognize treaties and everything else because those treaties were made with the British and this and that. But the thing is that Canada is obligated to follow all of, and live by those.
They're still a British colony.
And that they're still part of the British Commonwealth. The only thing Canada did get from the British, from the Queen, is that they wanted a flag. They didn't want to fly the Union Jack anymore. They wanted a flag. So the Queen says, well, you have a right to have a flag.
But regardless of any autonomy that they do have, they still have an absolute legal obligation to fulfill the commitments the Crown made.
But the thing is that they wanted a constitution next. And so the Queen says, well, and every corporation is entitled to its own constitution. Then after they put their constitution together, then they said to the Queen, well, listen, we want dominion over all the land and we want dominion over the people. And the Queen says, I can't give you that. I said, what do you mean you can't give us that? The Queen says, because it's not mine. The land belongs to the Native people. And you have to convince the Native people either to give you the land or to come to some agreement where it gives you dominion over the land. And also that the Native people themselves are going to have to give up their birthright basically to Canada and become Canadian citizens, basically enfranchise. And the Native people have never done that. They've never relinquished title to the land, and they've never given up their sovereignty. And so you're going to have to work it out. So that was back in the 70s, and this is why Canada established what was known as the Land Claims Commission. Mm-hmm. But the thing, Land Claims Commission has said, well, they'll settle, and encourage Native people to do land claims. But the thing is, our Native people will never get land back. What they'll do is they'll pay for the land, but they'll pay for the land at the time of contact. If the land was only 3 cents an acre, never taking into consideration inflation and all this kind of stuff, and that's all they'll pay them.
That's the U.S. does the same thing. And that's exactly what they do. Yeah. Look, we're at about now. We'll take a break and we'll come back and we'll go more on this because this is what people have to understand where this stuff comes from, and I think this conversation is providing a lot of that information. But we'll take a break and come on back. This is John Kane with Paul Delarone, James Gray, and Matt Hill in studio, and we'll be back right after this.
Comes up on another day. wasn't always this way. You used to call me baby 10 times a day. And now the only call I ever get from you is from the bar 2:30. Feel the light, feel the light. Something going on. Feel the light, and it feels like we got trouble in the wigwam. Are we grasping and strong? I still love you, that means anything at all. If you still want me, baby, give me a sign, and I'll be yours. I'll be mine.
All right. Thanks for coming back. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. I want to thank my sponsors. I want to thank Ross and Holly John and the RJE family of businesses. Eric White and ERW Enterprises, including ERW Wholesale. I want to thank my good friends, Ed Schindler and Cynthia Trice and Neville Spring for their contributions. Hey, and I want to, I got to add a new sponsor to the show, Legacy 420 in Tananaga. I want to mention them. They're stepping up to make sure that that we can continue to do the work that we do here, continue to provide a Native voice to the issues that we face, and frankly, a Native voice to the issues that everybody faces. I mean, when we talk about a lot of the stuff that we're going through, the persecution and the oppression, we are not alone in what we go through. I mean, there are people of color, there are indigenous people all over the globe that have faced the same kind of thing, whether it's people in Africa. It's funny, I just saw somebody, and recently on Facebook, they've been posting a lot about this, that the South Africa is passed a law to reclaim the lands from white people. And oh, yeah, white people are going to be kicked off their lands. I said, you know what? I'll tell you what. When they legalize white slavery, then come back and complain to me. In the meantime, if you're suggesting that somehow, reclamation of lost lands, and I don't care if it's 50 years ago, 100 years ago, if it was wrong, it was wrong. If it's illegitimate, it's illegitimate. And I don't care how many times it's changed hands, wrong hands. If it's a stolen good, it's a stolen good. And, so I'm sorry, I'm not that sympathetic.
And there's no
statute of limitations.
Statute of limitation on theft.
No, as far as we're concerned, it's not. I mean,
no, but there isn't. I mean, look at today. Nobody thinks twice about the Israelis wanting to, say they're claiming Jerusalem back and all this kind of stuff. Nobody says anything about it. And that. But if we talk about getting our lands back, it's such a horrible thing.
Well, and again, they'll say that about Israel, but they'll ignore the fact that they're stripping land away from Palestinians.
That's right.
Look, I'm not suggesting that I'm a huge fan of the United Nations. And I understand the limitations and how complicated and conflicted the United Nations is. But at the same time, when I see certain things that have been put in print by the international community, and Canada and the United States are in such clear violation of this thing on so many levels. I mean, and Article 43 of this thing makes it very clear what the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is.
What is this thing?
What this thing, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. That's what camera, there we go. Yeah. Article 43 of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples makes it very clear. And what it says is, the rights recognized herein constitute the minimum standards for survival, dignity, and well-being of indigenous peoples of the world. So the minimum standards. So in order to get this thing approved by the nations who did vote for it, and only 4 voted against it, they had to have a real low bar and create what they recognize is the minimum standards, and not for prosperity. Look, it says for survival dignity, whatever the hell that's supposed to mean. Because that's in the eye of the beholder, I guess. And then, well-being is not prosperity. I don't care. Well-being is really tantamount to survival. It's the same thing.
Well, look, since back in 1976, 77, there was delegations from the Western Hemisphere that went to the United Nations, and our peoples were not even given a recognition of being nations. Our people had to, the only way they could go and speak before the United Nations was they had to come in as non-governmental organizations.
That's still the case.
That's still the case. And the thing is that, everybody who's gotten this document keeps saying, oh, look, the United Nations is recognizing the rights of indigenous people. But what people don't understand is that even now, there are Native people who are there at the United Nations in Geneva, Switzerland, in New York City. And what the United Nations looks at, that we're not people. We are considered population, not people. And so when people think that this is such a great document, they better understand it doesn't apply to them because you are not considered as people. Still, that dogma of discovery, that papal bull is still being applied to us, and that we're just population. Where they consider us the same as the trees, the deer, and that. I mean, the grass on your lawn is a population of grass.
But I mean, to be clear, this doesn't apply to us.
It doesn't.
Was and I mean, it was never intended to. What it's supposed to apply to are the UN member states. What it's supposed to do is limit what they're able to do to us, basically.
Yes.
So my point with this thing is that both the U.S. and Canada can't even meet the minimum standard that the UN is holding them to. They aren't holding us to a standard. That's not what this is about.
No,
this isn't about us. It's about what the UN member states are supposed to be forbidden from doing. Yeah. In fact, what it says is that there's nothing that they can do, whether it's land use issues, whether it's legislation, whether it's commerce, whether it's health, that there's nothing that they can do without our free, prior, and informed consent. And yet, none of these countries, the United States and Canada, they don't get consent for anything they've done.
Look, we're still not considered people. That's the point I'm trying to make here. Because this is what, there was a time when our people dealt with the War Department. We dealt with State Department, and so on. Now, we don't deal with any of those people because the thing is that, they put us in here on the U.S. side is the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the Department of the Interior, and what does the Department of Interior deal with? Parks and wildlife and forests and so on.
Mining,
and in Canada, it's the same thing. It's the Department of Indian Affairs and Northern Development.
Yeah,
so the thing is that. We're still in the same position as when they first landed here. The doctrine of discovery. We still we're considered not being people. We're considered having no right to be sovereign, and therefore they can enslave us. They can kill us. They can take our lands away from us. They can do all these things because God told them they had the right to do it.
But I mean, but the reality is, even though the United States and Canada and other countries are still practicing that, when you look at the international community, none of them embrace this notion of racism based on religion. Although they'll all allow it, they'll all look the other way when the United States. I mean, the United States is quick to condemn Russia for annexing Crimea, but they still never resolved their illegal annexation of Hawaii or Puerto Rico or any of our lands, and it's the same thing with Canada. So, look, I mean, without getting into, I mean, it's not our language. I mean, so when they use words like indigenous and indigenous peoples, I understand what their definitions are. And when they're talking about indigenous peoples, they're already assuming that we're an oppressed people. Because that's, by definition, they're talking about an indigenous people being a people who are surrounded by a dominant culture. Which, look, I don't care what the United States claims to be. I think that we have to assert who we are, who we've always been. And again, it gets into that definition of what Umwe is. And that's why we are Umwe and they aren't. Because their past is shady, it's criminal, It was been built on slavery and genocide and theft, not to mention rape and murder and all kinds of other things that are associated with this thing.
You see, our language is so important. You know, today we want to call ourselves Indians. We want to call ourselves Senecas and Mohawks. We want to call ourselves Aboriginals. We want to call ourselves Indigenous. None of those are ours. We are Ungwahungwe.
Yeah.
And no matter what Ungwahungwe language is spoken in this, in Turtle Island, every one of us, what we refer to ourselves is the exact same thing. Like a lot of people have tried to say, well, it means real people, it means the first people, original people, and so on. But that's not really what it is. Ungwe is the human. Ungwe is a forever. And the forever is creation. That we are human beings who are in harmony with the creation. And creation guides us. And that's what we follow, because that is the forever. Because creation continues to go on and on because it's unnatural. Whereas everything else that's being thrown at us is man-made. His religion, his laws, and everything else, it's all man-made. Whereas ours, that this land, that sun rising, that moon in the sky, the stars, the wind, the rain, the animals, the insects, all that, that's the forever. That's Guyana de Goa. The thing is, our people did not have laws. Because if you have to have laws, then you no longer are a free people. And our people, we always say, Tewada Dewonio. And that we have the right to choice. But we understand that when we make choices in life, we must accept the responsibilities for the choices that we make. And the choices that we make cannot cause other people harm. It cannot cause wrong to others. You can decide to do whatever you want as long as it's not interfering on someone else's.
Yeah.
And that's what this Teohade has always been about. And Teohade,
Explain what it is.
Teohade means what people call the Turo. And
behind it.
yes, and this Turo, what it says is that between individuals, between families, between peoples, and that we must mutually respect one another, that we never force ourselves upon someone else. And that our Ungwahungwe people, before the coming of the Europeans, we had this amongst us. And when the white man got here, and we extended it to him, and but not on this land. It was extended to him on the water.
Because Teohade refers to a path.
Yes, two paths, okay? And there's no path in the water. Mm-mm. There's no evidence of them ever having passed.
Once the wake goes by.
Yeah, once the wake goes by, that's it. That's why we say, Yah Tehuyaneron Serayo. He doesn't have a path here. He has no history here. And that's why he's got nothing here. And only on the water. And then we said, for this reason, we will launch our canoe, and we will travel with you on that water in mutual respect to teach one another, assist one another, and so on. But our paths will never cross. And
we will not steer each other's vessel.
Yes, and not steer each other's vessel and so on. But today, a sad part is that our people want to keep a foot in the canoe, and we want to put a foot in the ship. And we want the benefits of both, but we don't want the responsibility of either one.
We want rights without responsibility.
Yes, we want the rights. But see, everybody's talking about our rights. And I tell people, you have no right. If you have not taken responsibility for anything, then you have no right. It's the same thing, sovereignty. If you don't assert sovereignty, then you don't have it. And
the worst expression I've ever heard is this idea of preserving sovereignty. Every time you and I discussed it, but preserving it makes it sound like you put it in a jar and then you put it up on a shelf, and that you're not going to use it. I mean, you're preserving it. Yeah. And I've heard this. I've heard this at a place like Onondaga. This is, we can't jeopardize our sovereignty by what? Using it? I mean, and that's the logic that is put forth by some.
Use it or lose it, right?
Yeah,
Well, exactly. I mean,
that's
because it doesn't. If you don't use it, then how do you claim that it exists? You know, I say that sovereign. You know, one of my quotes is sovereignty is not our defense; it's what we defend.
Yes.
If we don't defend it, then you know, I mean, right now the Senecas are in this battle over contaminating the Allegheny River. The company, Epiphany, of all names they call themselves, Epiphany, they, you talk about laws, they claimed they wanted to do a cease and desist letter to the Senecas for complaining about them wanting to contaminate the Allegheny River. And they said, we are following the laws of man,
Yeah.
the laws of science, and the laws of God. And they literally said that in their letter. I'm thinking, for one thing, what you guys are writing as science is just whatever, you know, technical data you can muster to justify what you're doing. And laws of man and laws of God, not our God.
No.
And you're not. Your laws are of your men. They aren't natural law. Nothing. No place in there did they talk about natural law or the laws of creation or the laws of nature. They just talked about the stuff that they can concoct
Laws of
themselves.
perpetuation.
Exactly. So I mean,
Totally violated that.
I mean, that's that whole man-made, because all of those things, God's law is man-made. It's not made by God. Man's law is obviously man-made, and this scientific law is a bunch of their guys creating, you know, this junk science to justify what they're doing.
Yeah.
I mean, so yeah, this is the stuff that we still face, and that's why I think it's so important that people understand basic concepts. And you know, and again, your description of the Ohade, the Turo. What is equally sad is that we almost accept that we don't have a history before white man showed up here.
That's
and
right.
that's why when people talk about the tour, they always say, "Oh, it's about the ship and the canoe." No, the last iteration of it with white people may have been that way, but that's not the original concept. Goes way before the first white man. In fact, I would argue that the Ohade isn't even just a compact between men. It's a compact between us and creation.
That's right. That is right. That's why we call ourselves Ungwehungwe. It's because we have that compact with creation.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you know, that's the first compact.
Yeah, this is Loran.
It is the first compact we've made.
He calls it the covenant. The first covenant of Ungwehungwe is with nature, with creation, with our mother.
Yeah, and see, and the thing is that people don't understand that. The Ohade was making it very clear to Europeans. The law of this land is Guyana-Goa, is the creation. That's the law here. Not even the law. I hate that word. You know, and that, you know, it's the design of the creation. That is what we follow, and that we are a free people, and that as creation had intended.
Well, nature has a flow. Creation has a flow.
That's right.
And so when you're talking about creation or nature, it is dynamic. It is moving. And so
it's alive.
You have two
it's
ways.
alive.
You have two ways of dealing with nature. Either you go with it and you accept and be a part of that natural flow, or you fight against it. And that's why when people talk about the idea of opposing and fighting nature.
If we followed the natural ways like it's supposed to, we would not be talking about pipelines. We would not be talking about this pollution. We wouldn't be talking about any of these things if we would have followed exactly what creation was showing us.
We'd still be able to eat the fish and drink the water and all of that.
And breathe and not have all our children running around and spraying, Flovent and, other stuff down their throats.
For asthma
and
for everything else. Yep. No, I mean, it's... when you look at what we have done to ourselves and not just creation, because the reality is creation will heal itself. The question is, will we? I mean, and until we change some of our own practices and we start changing our lifestyles, you know, at the screening the other day, people were asking me what can we do, and and how do we, in fact, Martin Luther King had a quote, and he told Harry Belafonte this. He goes, "I'm afraid I am integrating my people into a burning house." I mean, think about that. So all of the civil rights that he was fighting for black people, he came to a conclusion, told Harry Belafonte, he goes, I am afraid that I'm integrating my people into a burning house. And that's what one of the guys brought up. And I'm thinking, that is a perfect analogy because I don't want anything to do with the burning house. So when, and I always quote this one, that this is one of my favorite quotes, but I have to clarify. It says, the task of an activist is not to navigate the systems of oppression or the systems of oppressive power with as much personal integrity as possible. It is to dismantle those systems. I say, you know what? I'm not even sure that I'm that interested in dismantling those systems of oppression. I just want to untangle myself from them. I want to push them off of me.
See, in our language,
and if other people want that, then by all means live under that system.
That's decolonization.
In our language, we say the wadotarisi. It's basically untie ourselves from that.
Go.
That's what we have to see. And the thing is that somehow we seem to believe that we have to fight for our rights in their courts. We don't belong in their courts. And that's what the Ohade clearly tells us, is that they have no right to do this to us, and we have no right to do it to them. That's what the mutual respect is all about. You fix things and take care of things in your house, we fix and take care of things in our house.
I have a friend who does anthropological research, and what she found was that during the time that Europeans were interpreting our languages, so the French and the Dutch and the British, there became this kind of almost miscommunication, and this idea of binding each other. And instead of forming alliances or relationships, they started using all of that stuff. The idea of binding ourselves to something, and even interpreting again the Gallina de Goa, when people say the great binding peace. Those are languages that's the stuff that got lost in translation. That when the idea of the silver covenant chain and binding ourselves with the iron chain and binding ourselves, all of that stuff was stuff that got lost in translation, because that's when we talked about a relationship. We didn't talk about binding ourselves in a relationship. We talked about again having a relationship and having allegiance or alliances, but not necessarily binding ourselves. So when you talk about us having to use a word that says, no, we are untying ourselves from that bondage, because bondage is exactly a European, that whole idea of placing people in bondage was a European construct.
Yeah.
Like when our people talked about, and they interpret as binding, we have a ceremony called the Astunwa Goa.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? The thing is that we have four ceremonies, the principal ceremonies, and that's the Adunwa, that is the one about the people. And then you have Ganehoru, that's the one about the creation. And then there's Gayondawano, which is the one that has to do with our ability to make decisions, to take responsibility, and so on. And then the Astunwa Goa is what it does is it brings those three together, and it keeps them all tied together. That's why we say it's our ways, they're interwoven. But people like to use this like spiritual religion. It has nothing to do with religion, because the thing is, religion is something made by humans. Sa'oyera is what is creation. Sa'oyera means the direction. And people will say, it means natural, and that.
But it's that same flow, it's motion,
it's the direction of nature taking us, showing us, and so on. That's what Sa'oyera is, and this is what to keep all these things together, because those are all things that have been designed by creation, and this other thing that we're being forced upon us, is taking us away from everything that is real. And this is why everything that they pushed on us is artificial. And so the thing is that, we need to get back to who we are. And a lot of our people have a hard time to understand. We need to take more time to teach each other using our language. And the thing is that, today, a lot of our young people now, they're learning the language, to speak the language. But the problem is they're saying words in our language, but their thinking is still European. And we have to get back to our people knowing the language. And because the thing is that our way of understanding, our way of looking at things, it's all based on everything that is real and natural. And so we have to get our people not just to say words, but to actually know it. And we have to look at our ancestors. When they put this language together, it was based on their way of life. It was based on their relation with the natural world and so on. That's how they devised this. That's why when we say that our language is living, it's because it's based on actual life itself. It's not a bunch of nouns and so on. It's like when we say yogonoru. It's people. Oh, it's raining. No, yogo means you can see it. It's obvious. Ganoru means it's precious because it's life-giving, and that it's life-supporting, and so when you see that rain water falling from the sky, you're not talking about that water itself. You're talking about the action, the causes, what it causes. That it helps life to continue. That's why Ganoru, it's precious. The act, the whole thing is because it keeps everything alive. It renews everything.
Yeah.
Well, again, Paul, I want to thank you for coming in. James, thanks for coming in. Matt, it's good to have you back in studio with us. Again, a great show, great information shared here. I think you add so much especially with the language issue. So look forward to having you back.
Well,
and we'll do it again.
I'm glad to be able to come and to talk. But I want people to understand I'm not on this. I don't come on the show because I want to argue with people. I don't come on the show because I want to hurt people's feelings and that. I want people to know and hear something they haven't heard before, and that because there's so much that our people don't know about who we are and what we're all about, and our young people are hungry.
Yeah.
And I'm so disappointed with so many of the older people, and that where their answer to our young people when they ask a question, because it's our way, but no explanation why is it our way.
Yep.
Right. All right. Again, I want to thank you for coming in. I want to thank Unity Stream and Apache Radio Net for providing our streaming. I also want to thank CKWE for both the simulcast and the rebroadcast. And I want to thank Netroots Radio, Real People's Media, and Indigenous Resistance Radio. And, of course, all of you who share the show, including my wife, who shares the show on many of the Facebook group pages. I want to thank all of you for sharing the show and sharing the message. And we'll be back here on Monday. Yahweh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Talk to somebody, let them know. Talk to your friends and let your feelings show. Even if it feels like there's nobody, don't let go. Sometimes it feels like the walls are closing in. Sometimes it feels like